Hello everybody, Luke Schulte, field agronomist for Beck's Hybrids. If you're like me, it's easy to get caught up in the here and the now. But when it comes to making that fungicide decision, there's more to that overall consideration to make sure that passes as profitable as possible. Certainly the moment we're in, and what is the overall yield potential and the overall state of our crop needs to be considered. But also, what stresses have we incurred up until this point that we maybe can't see as we're starting to make those crop observations and scouting notes. And then lastly, can we still be profitable if we don't see much leaf disease and we apply a fungicide? It's no secret, we've had a cool growing season up to this point. In fact, I went back and looked at GDU accumulation for Central Ohio. If we go back to the 1st of May through just a couple of days ago, July 10th, our GDU accumulation is off about 9, almost 10%. So we've got a crop that's developing rather slowly, even though most of it was planted rather timely. First thing I think about it in that situation is, how much moisture will that fungicide add to my crop that's already developing maybe a little later than I had anticipated or desired? Well, in 2019, Purdue did a study that really correlates well to what we're experiencing this year with this slower developed crop. Because 2019, we had a late planted crop, okay? So in 2019, Purdue did a fungicide trial on 17 trials, multiple replications within that study. So a large data set. And believe it or not, fungicide only added a little over 0.5% moisture, which to me was rather surprising. If we look at our own data, we've seen the profitability at PFR increase rather substantially in a late planted situation versus more normal planted. Okay? Now, in that ROI screen you have in front of you, we didn't factor in the added cost of moisture, but 0.5% doesn't really contribute a significant amount to that difference in ROI. But that is occurring for several reasons. 2 reasons, in fact. Number one, disease is indifferent. It's going to come in about the same time regardless of when we plant. 3rd week of June, 4th week of June, we'll start to see the first lesions of gray leaf spot. And right around that first part of August or first week of August, we'll see northern corn leaf blight come in. Later developed corn, like we're experiencing this year, just has so much further to go, or so much more of that reproductive and grain fill time frame in order to get to maturity. And so that's that susceptible time frame. And then secondly, it's about day length. We're going to get to tassel later than we desired. And our days are shortening. More importantly, our nights are lengthening. Our nights, we produce that moisture, and that moisture then lasts deeper into the day before those leaves dry off, creates a more favorable environment for disease. Secondly is, what stresses have we incurred up until this point? Okay, I think most all of us were very dry the second half of May and the first half of June. And for that first 2 weeks of May planting window, because of that dry weather, we're seeing some level of crown rot infection. Now, we've talked about crown rot in the past. You can't see it outwardly. You have to dig the plant to observe it. So it's not going to show up now without intense digging and cutting plants. However, it will show up in September when we see those random ghost plants and we see that premature death that's associated with that crown rot infection. Fungicides can't make that go away, but they do diminish that, and they delay that early plant death that we see because of that crown rot infection. And secondly is, most of us have experienced some either sporadic dry periods or sustained dry periods. And specifically, I want to focus on nutrition. More importantly, nitrogen and sulfur. Nitrogen and sulfur get in the plant primarily with water. When you lack the rainfall, you lack the efficiency that we desire to get what we apply actually in the plant. We know those 2 nutrients are really critical to overall plant health, photosynthesis, and sulfur specifically is very helpful to overall stress tolerance. In those situations where nutrition's lacking, it won't show up now, then in all likelihood, it'll show up later in the grain fill window. We know when we use fungicides that contain, say, a strobilurin, we can improve nitrogen use efficiency. We can actually increase stress tolerance that perhaps that dry weather has ultimately led to within our crop. Last thing I want to talk about, though, is can we still see profitability or still see a yield impact when we don't have a lot of leaf disease? Okay? It's been pretty well documented. The strobilurin component to most of our fungicide premixes is very good at providing other physiological benefits like nitrogen use efficiency, lowering that stress load of that plant. It's been well documented, but it hasn't been able to be visualized or observed and seen until now. Last year at the London PFR farm, we saw that proof of increased stress tolerance. So in front of you, you can see untreated corn in the same study versus right beside it, actually 6 rows over, the Veltima treated corn. And I want you to focus on the anthers. The anthers contain the pollen. On the untreated, you can see that plant is pretty well spent. Most of the anthers have dropped and that pollen is shed. But when you focus on the tassel, specifically the anthers of the Veltima treated corn, there's like 50, 60, maybe even 70% of those anthers that contain the pollen still to be shed. Think about those growing seasons when you've had some of your best corn yields. One of the largest contributing factors to that is a very favorable pollination window. What I mean by favorable? Long, moderate, or cool temperatures. The longer that pollination window, the higher the kernel retention and the better the overall pollination. Now you may be saying in this picture, well, the untreated still pollinated, and it did. But the fact that we have a lot of those anthers still hanging on is proof that we've reduced the stress load in that Veltima application and widened that pollination window, making for more successful pollination. So even in the absence of disease, when we choose fungicides with multiple modes of action that specifically contain, say, a strobilurin that we know can minimize some of those detrimental effects with stress, we can be profitable and increase our profitability. So don't be like me, don't get caught up in the here and the now as you're starting to make those fungicide decisions. And as we enter this time frame, consider the things we just spoke about to make sure that fungicide pass is as profitable as possible. Thanks for tuning in and have a great day.